She cut my oxygen line, I said to the 911 operator, my voice hoarse and weak. I have her on camera. She came into my house and cut my oxygen line. There was a long pause on the other end of the call, the kind where you know someone's trying to decide if this is a prank or a panic. But it wasn't a joke. I was lying on the floor, gasping like a fish, trying to claw air into my lungs while the footage looped again and again on my phone. Karen Wendell, neighborhood nightmare and HOA board queen, stepping into my living room uninvited, crouching by the machine, and clipping the line like she was trimming a hedge. My life support had apparently violated HOA aesthetic. A week before, I came home from the hospital after a brutal respiratory infection. Not COVID, not the flu, just a perfect storm of pneumonia and asthma that had me intubated for 3 days. Maria, my wife, wheeled me through the front door with a portable oxygen unit trailing behind like a faithful puppy. I wasn't dying, but without that airflow, I might as well have been. We set up a home system. Simple tubing, discreet tanks, one quiet machine humming beside the couch. I thought I was finally safe. But I'd underestimated one thing, Karen. Karen Wendell had a permanent squint, like she'd been glaring at the world since birth, and never got out of the habit. She was the type of person who called the fire department because someone had a fire pit going 4 blocks away. The kind of woman who measured grass blade. The moment she saw my oxygen setup, she pursed her lips like she'd tasted vinegar. The next day, I got a note. Not mailed, not typed. Taped directly to my front window with blue painter's tape. It read, "Medical equipment visible from the street violates HOA Code 4.3b. Please relocate or shield from view. Thank you, the board." I should have ignored her. I should have let Maria rip it down and set it on fire like she wanted to. But I was tired. Recovery is weird. It makes you more patient and less tolerant at the same time. I moved the tank slightly, just inside the drapes, and figured that would be enough to shut her up. It wasn't. The next few days were tense. Karen would hover. That's not metaphor, she literally hovered. She walked her dog by our house 8 times a day, pausing to stare at our windows. Sometimes she pretended to tie her shoelace. Sometimes she just stood there and squinted at the blinds, like she was waiting for me to sneeze out of compliance. Maria started parking our car diagonally just to block her line of sight. We laughed about it, called her the squinter, but I didn't feel safe. Not really. Then came the night I woke up suffocating. It was like drowning on dry land. My chest locked up. My hands scrambled at my nose cannula. No airflow. I tore the tubes off and tried to stand but collapsed against the coffee table. Everything blurred. I dragged myself across the rug, the way you crawl when instinct takes over, and reached the machine, dead. I thought maybe the power went out, but the lights were on. The machine was blinking a red warning. I followed the line and saw it cut. Clean. Not snapped, not frayed, scissored. The only coherent thought I had was check the footage. We'd installed a security system last year after someone tried to steal packages off our porch. Full audio, wide angle, motion activated. I pulled it up on my phone and rewound to the last motion trigger. There she was. Karen. At 2:12 a.m. She walked right up to the front door like she owned the place. Used something, maybe a master key or lockpick, and walked in without hesitation. No gloves. No mask. She went straight to the machine, bent down, pulled out scissors, and snipped the line like she was cutting a ribbon at a grand opening. Then she looked around, smiled, and walked out. That smile did something to me. Not just fear. Rage. That was the smile of someone who thought they'd won. Who thought they were untouchable. By the time the paramedics arrived, Maria had burst in from the night shift, half in scrubs and fury. She'd gotten the call from 911 while she was mid-triage and nearly ran over a stop sign getting home. She saw the tubing, the footage, and turned colder than a steel tray. Maria wasn't loud. She didn't scream. She just said, "We're going to bury her." Karen was back the next morning, walking her dog in a robe like nothing happened. Maria stormed out to confront her. I watched from the living room with an oxygen mask and the security feed still up. Karen smiled as Maria marched across the lawn. And then she said it. I just wanted to restore the harmony of the neighborhood, Karen told her. Your husband's gear is really alarming to some of the residents. Maria didn't swing. She's not violent. But she did get close enough for Karen to stumble backward into her decorative lilac bush. She didn't know yet that we had her on camera. She was still in denial mode. Still smiling like she'd done us a favor. I called the police that afternoon. Officer Delgado showed up, same one who helped us after the package theft. He had a permanently unimpressed face, like nothing could shock him anymore. Until I showed him the video. She just walked in, he asked. Like she was getting milk from the fridge, I replied. He stared at the screen. Then he stared at me. Sir, are you saying this woman entered your home without permission and tampered with your medical equipment in the middle of the night? Yes. And you have all of that recorded? High definition. Audio. Time stamped. He turned back to the footage and rewound. Played it again. He even chuckled once, darkly, when Karen smiled at the camera on her way out. You know, he said slowly, I don't usually say this, but I think your HOA's about to get real quiet. Karen still didn't know she was caught. Not yet. But things were about to change. I didn't just want justice. I wanted every smug, entitled step she'd taken to come back and bite her right on the HOA-approved paver stones she called a front porch. And with the evidence we had, and the community she'd been tormenting for years, that bite was going to be deep. Maria didn't waste a second. As soon as Officer Delgado left with a copy of the footage in hand and the promise of formal charges pending, she became a woman on a mission. I was still hooked up to the backup oxygen unit, sitting on the couch with a blanket draped over me like an old man in a nursing home, but Maria was moving through the house like a tactical storm. Phone in one hand, notebook in the other, she started making lists. Contact. Neighbors. Witnesses. Legal options. And on the top of her list, underlined twice and circled 3 times, was Karen Wendell. Maria had always been the calm in the storm during emergencies, thanks to her work in the ER. But this wasn't about some random patient. This was about her husband. About someone breaking into our home, while I slept and cutting the line that fed me life. The more she thought about it, the angrier she got, but her anger wasn't loud. It simmered. It calculated. I'd seen Maria angry maybe 3 times in our entire relationship. Each time ended with someone crying who wasn't her. By noon, she had already filed a formal complaint with the HOA board, written a statement to attach to the police report, and scheduled an emergency consultation with a lawyer. Meanwhile, Karen was still walking her dog around the neighborhood like she was the queen of the cul-de-sac. She even had the nerve to wave at our house that afternoon, as if she didn't just try to kill me in my sleep. Her wave was slow, exaggerated, with a smile that said she thought we were playing some kind of game and she was winning. I wanted to scream, but I didn't have the breath. So instead, I pulled up the footage again. Watched it. Rewound it. Zoomed in. I noticed new things each time, her eyes darting to the security camera in the corner and then choosing to ignore it. The calm, almost gleeful snip of the scissors. The way she brushed invisible lint from her sleeve like she was proud of what she'd done. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was deliberate. Later that evening, we got a knock on the door. It wasn't the police. It was Ms. Pearl, our next-door neighbor. She was pushing 80 but sharper than most people half her age. Former systems analyst for a private tech firm, retired early and known around the block for her unmatched lemon bars and complete lack of patience for HOA nonsense. She walked in like she owned the place, carrying a flash drive and a mug of tea. "Heard about what happened," she said, sitting down without waiting for an invitation. "I'd like to help." Maria blinked. "Help how?" Pearl smirked. "I've been running a little side project. Just my own little neighborhood watch thing. Karen's been in my crosshairs for years. Ever since she tried to fine me for planting native wildflowers instead of that god-awful turf grass. I've got cameras too. Micro-drones. Thermal sensors. Night vision. I've got footage from her backyard camera that picks up audio. You might want to hear what she said before she cut that line. She plugged the flash drive into our TV. I looked at Maria. Maria looked at me. We didn't even have time to ask questions before the screen lit up with black and white infrared footage. Karen's face came into view. It was right after she entered our home. Maybe this'll teach him not to make the neighborhood look like a hospital, Karen's voice said, crystal clear. I felt my hands curl into fists. Maria froze, her jaw tightening so hard I thought her teeth might crack. Karen hadn't just done this out of some misguided sense of neighborhood order. She had a vendetta. She thought she was teaching us a lesson. And now we had the clearest evidence possible that it was premeditated. Pearl leaned back in her chair and took a sip of her tea. You should go public, she said. Post the footage online. Show the community who she really is. I shook my head. Not yet. Let the police finish their part. I want this airtight. Maria nodded in agreement. But the HOA? They're going to hear about this now. So we wrote a letter. A long, detailed, professionally worded statement that included screenshots, time-stamped footage stills, and transcribed audio. We made sure to highlight Karen's exact words, her unauthorized entry, and the resulting medical emergency. We CC'd every board member, every known neighbor's email, and a copy to our lawyer. The subject line simply read, Urgent evidence of criminal activity by HOA board member. We hit send. The response was fast. By the next morning, 3 board members had resigned. Another called us to apologize, saying they had no idea Karen had gone so far. 2 others doubled down, claiming we were trying to smear Karen's good name. Maria laughed so hard she almost choked on her cereal. Karen, on the other hand, responded by posting a note on the HOA Facebook group that said, Some residents are spreading false information and manipulating footage to create drama. Please remember to trust your neighbors and not be swayed by hysterics. Pearl, ever the subtle saboteur, replied in the comments with, Hi Karen. Just checking. Do scissors count as gardening tools under HOA Code 4.3b? The post was deleted within 5 minutes. Later that day, Officer Delgado came back to follow up. He brought a second officer with him, a younger guy with a serious expression and a body camera already rolling. We're officially pursuing criminal charges, Delgado said. Trespassing, destruction of medical property, and reckless endangerment. Possibly attempted manslaughter depending on how the DA reviews it. Maria folded her arms. Good. Delgado nodded toward me. You okay? I lifted the oxygen mask and gave a weak thumbs up. Still breathing. That got a smirk out of him. Let me know if she tries anything else. Though I doubt she's feeling so bold now. But Karen wasn't the type to retreat. That became clear that evening when we heard yelling outside. I looked through the window and saw Karen on her porch, yelling into her phone. Loud. Angry. She kept gesturing toward our house. A few neighbors had come out to watch. One even pulled up a lawn chair like it was a show. She thinks she's being targeted, Pearl texted us later. She says the video was edited to make her look bad. She walked in and cut a medical line, I replied. Karen logic, Pearl said. She'll probably say you edited the oxygen out of your own lungs. We should have felt victorious. But I knew something else was coming. People like Karen didn't just accept consequences. They spun them into persecution. I had a feeling she was already planning her next move. Maria did too. That night, she walked into the living room holding a manila folder. It's time we talk to a lawyer, she said. Because if she wants a war, she's going to get one. And for the first time in days, I actually felt stronger. Because Karen might have thought we were weak. That I was sick and fragile. That Maria was just a nurse. That neighbors would stay silent. But she had no idea the kind of storm she'd just kicked up. And this time, the whole neighborhood was watching. The emergency hearing was scheduled for a Friday afternoon, but by Tuesday morning the entire neighborhood knew something was coming. Word spread fast, especially when half the HOA board abruptly resigned and Karen's porch arguments with her phone got louder and more frequent. One neighbor said she'd seen Karen throwing documents into her fireplace at 3 in the morning. Another claimed she overheard her trying to get a locksmith to rekey the HOA's shared office space, despite having no legal authority to do so. Whatever Karen's plan was, it clearly involved doubling down, and she was counting on the few remaining loyalists on the board to back her. Maria and I showed up to the pre-trial meeting with our lawyer, Paul Cartwright, a sharp-tongued legal veteran who dealt with enough HOA drama to consider it a personal mission. He wore a tan blazer that looked like it hadn't been fashionable since 1998 and carried a legal pad filled with notes written so tightly they resembled ancient runes. He was polite but efficient, cracking his knuckles as we walked into the municipal building's low-ceilinged hearing room. Karen was already there. She wore a blue blazer and a brooch shaped like an eagle, the kind of accessory someone wears when they want to look more official than they are. Her expression when we entered was something between a smirk and a snarl. She sat beside her attorney, a nervous-looking man in a wrinkled suit who spent most of his time flipping through papers and adjusting his glasses. The judge was an older man named Holbrook, a no-nonsense type with heavy eyebrows and a gavel he wasn't afraid to use. He looked like someone who'd seen every excuse in the book and didn't care for any of them. When he sat down and glanced over the preliminary files, he didn't even try to hide the sigh. "Ms. Wendell," he said, his voice flat, "you are aware this hearing pertains to an emergency request for a protective injunction and review of criminal conduct related to unauthorized home entry and interference with medical equipment, correct?" Karen stood and folded her hands in front of her like she was about to receive a community service award. "Yes, Your Honor, and if I may clarify—" "You may not," he interrupted. "Sit." That set the tone. Paul stood up and launched into a clean summary of the incident. He showed the footage on a portable screen. Karen entering our home, snipping the oxygen line, and leaving as casually as if she'd dropped off cookies. He paused the video on her smirking face. Then he played the enhanced audio Miss Pearl had provided, where Karen made her now infamous remark about teaching me a lesson. It was quiet in the room when it ended. The silence wasn't surprised. It was disgusted. Karen's lawyer cleared his throat. "Your Honor, my client maintains that she believed the equipment was a hazard to the neighborhood's appearance and was acting under the authority of the HOA charter." "Authority," Judge Holbrook repeated, "to enter someone's private home without consent in the dead of night and tamper with medical support equipment?" She misunderstood the parameters. She cut an oxygen line. Karen finally spoke up, her voice trembling with what she probably thought was righteous indignation. "I was trying to restore neighborhood standards. We have rules for a reason. If we let one person put medical gear out in the open, others will start building carports or storage sheds or who knows what else." Paul looked at the judge and raised an eyebrow. "Your Honor, as previously demonstrated, the equipment was entirely inside the home, partially shielded by the blinds, and posed zero threat to neighborhood aesthetics." Karen's mouth flapped open and closed like she was trying to find a sentence that would make her look less guilty and more victimized. "It was a visual intrusion," she managed. "And the HOA code?" "There is no HOA code," Paul cut in smoothly, "that permits criminal trespass or the endangerment of someone's life." Judge Holbrook leaned forward and laced his fingers together. "Ms. Wendell, do you understand that what you did could have resulted in serious injury or death? That this was not only illegal, but malicious?" Karen's response was to blink rapidly and say, "I was under stress." The judge stared at her for several seconds, then turned to Paul. "Mr. Cartwright, is your client seeking damages at this time or just protective relief?" "For now," Paul said, We're requesting an emergency injunction barring Ms. Wendell from approaching the Taylors' property and from holding any HOA authority until the criminal proceedings conclude. Civil damages will be addressed after those proceedings. Granted, the judge said without hesitation. Restraining order issued. HOA authority suspended immediately. Ms. Wendell, you are not to come within 200 feet of the Taylors' home or any property owned by them. Karen opened her mouth like she was about to protest but thought better of it. Her lawyer looked like he wanted to slide under the table. But it wasn't over. Just as we were packing up, a man in a suit entered the courtroom with a folder and approached the bench. He whispered something to the judge and handed over the folder. Judge Holbrook opened it, scanned the contents, and his expression shifted from annoyance to mild amusement. "It appears," he said, looking directly at Karen, "that your HOA's insurance provider has just filed a formal cancellation notice. Your unauthorized entry voided the liability coverage for the entire board." Karen's face went pale. "And," he continued, "they've forwarded documents indicating that you misrepresented your background when applying for the board. You failed to disclose a prior fraud conviction, did you not?" "Aye, that was sealed," Karen stammered. "Not from insurers," he replied. "That did it." Karen's attorney leaned over and whispered something urgently to her. She stood up abruptly and stormed out, heels clicking like gunshots across the tile. Outside the courthouse, the air felt lighter. Maria squeezed my hand, and for the first time in a long while, I saw something close to relief on her face. "She's spiraling," she said. "She's going to fight," I replied. "She's not done." "No," Maria said, "but neither are we." When we got home, there was already chatter on the neighborhood message board. Some residents were furious. Turns out Karen had fined several people for minor violations that weren't even real. One neighbor had been threatened over their mailbox paint. Another over a Halloween decoration that Karen claimed violated seasonal decor timelines. That night, Ms. Pearl sent us another file. It showed Karen 2 weeks ago, during a board meeting, bragging about how she was the only one keeping this neighborhood from turning into a trailer park. She mocked me, Maria, and a few other neighbors by name. She even joked about how those oxygen tanks make the place look like a field hospital. I knew what I had to do. I forwarded the clip to Delgado, to our lawyer, and finally, I uploaded it anonymously to the neighborhood forum. Within hours, it went viral. The Karen mask was off, and the neighborhood was ready to rise. Karen's downfall wasn't swift, it was spectacular. The neighborhood didn't just turn against her. It revolted. The video I posted to the community forum, the one where she mocked residents and called my oxygen setup a glorified lawn ornament, lit the fuse. People were shocked at first, then outraged, then united in a way I didn't think was possible for a group of mostly quiet suburban homeowners. Turns out, everyone had a story about Karen. Her fake rules, her impossible fines, the condescending notes she left on doors like a middle school hall monitor with a god complex. And now that her lies and criminal behavior were exposed, the neighborhood finally found its voice. It started with the petition. A father of 3 down the block, someone Karen had tried to report for having a trampoline visible from the street, started a formal HOA decertification petition. Within 24 hours, over 70% of the community had signed it. People who hadn't spoken in years were walking door to door, sharing stories about fines, threats, and passive-aggressive emails. One elderly couple had nearly lost their home after Karen tried to fine them for having a wheelchair ramp without architectural approval. Another resident showed us a letter Karen had sent demanding they paint their porch, a more calming shade of beige. We were past frustration now. This was full-blown rebellion. Meanwhile, Karen wasn't taking the loss quietly. She posted a dramatic video to the community page, standing in front of her immaculately trimmed hedges, eyes red and voice trembling, claiming she was the victim of a coordinated harassment campaign led by malicious elements. The comments section was brutal. People weren't buying it. Not after seeing the footage of her snipping my oxygen line, or hearing her trash her neighbors on camera like a cartoon villain. She had gone from feared to mocked in record time. Maria and I kept our heads down and let the evidence speak for itself, but we weren't idle. With Paul's help, we filed formal paperwork to freeze Karen's access to HOA funds. Turns out, she'd been signing off on discretionary spending, thousands of dollars for community beautification that no one could trace, a fountain no one remembered approving, a security camera system installed only on her side of the block, and hundreds in catering receipts from a private planning lunch that took place at a 5-star restaurant 3 towns over. But the real fireworks came courtesy of Ms. Pearl. Late one night, she sent us a message. Just 2 words, showtime. At exactly 8 p.m., every garage door on our block turned into a movie screen. Pearl had used mini projectors mounted to her drones to play the security footage of Karen's break-in. One angle showed her entering my house. Another zoomed in on the cut tubing. The audio echoed down the street. Maybe this'll teach him not to make the neighborhood look like a hospital. Played on a loop. Karen came out of her house yelling, demanding people cease this illegal display. But no one listened. Someone handed out popcorn. A teenager brought a Bluetooth speaker and played the Imperial March from Star Wars while Karen stomped around in her bathrobe. At one point, she tried to spray down a garage door with her garden hose, only to get tangled in the cord and fall into her own hydrangeas. Someone caught that on camera too. It hit Reddit within the hour. The next morning, things escalated. We found out Karen had submitted a complaint to the city council claiming mass harassment and technological abuse. She even named Pearl as a cyber aggressor. But Pearl had done her homework. She went to the next council meeting with a binder thicker than a phone book, filled with screenshots, footage, and a timeline of Karen's infractions dating back 5 years. Pearl spoke for 10 minutes. When she was done, the council voted unanimously to audit the HOA and strip it of any municipal privileges until the investigation was complete. But the best twist came from a place none of us expected: Karen's job. Or rather, her fake one. Someone on the forum had done a little digging. Karen had claimed for years that she worked in community planning and urban development. She even used that title to justify many of her HOA decisions. But after the videos surfaced, someone contacted the state licensing board. Turns out, Karen had no certifications, no employment history. The planning firm she claimed to work for had never heard of her. And worse, she had a fraud conviction in another state under a different name. She'd legally changed her surname 10 years ago after serving probation. By the time this came to light, she was already being investigated by the HOA's bank, the insurance company, and now the state. Charges were piling up. Her lawyer reportedly dropped her after she refused to follow legal advice and attempted to file a countersuit for emotional damages caused by oxygen machines. Maria and I watched all of it unfold with a mix of disbelief and grim satisfaction. For the first time in weeks, I could sleep without fear that someone would tamper with my lifeline. But I still felt tense, like there was one final piece left to fall. And then it did. A few days later, we received a delivery. Not from the police or the HOA, but from a local sheriff. It was a new copy of our security footage, this one enhanced and synced with an angle we hadn't seen before. A camera hidden in the motion detector panel had picked up something else during Karen's break-in. Not only had she cut the line, she'd also opened our mail. She'd rifled through a stack on the table and pocketed a small padded envelope. One I now remembered was the delivery of my new medication. Controlled substance. Tracked by prescription. It was a federal offense. We handed that footage over immediately. Delgado returned, this time with a warrant. He didn't even knock when he got to Karen's house. He walked up with a team, knocked twice, and when she didn't answer, they opened the door themselves. She was in the middle of packing, half her living room filled with suitcases and boxes. The look on her face when she was let out in cuffs was something I'll never forget. Shock. Disbelief. like the world had conspired to punish her for something she thought was just a little neighborhood correction. But this wasn't over a noise complaint or a garden gnome. She'd broken into a home, endangered a life, committed mail fraud, lied to an entire community, and manipulated a system meant to protect people. She didn't just break the rules. She thought she was the rules. And now she was being carted off by the people who actually enforce them. As they drove away, Ms. Pearl appeared beside us on the sidewalk, holding a bag of lemon bars and her tablet. She looked up at the empty house across the street, then back at me. Karen always thought this neighborhood belonged to her, she said. I nodded slowly. Turns out, Pearl added, it belongs to everyone else. And for once I took a deep, clear breath. Karen's trial wasn't just a court proceeding, it was a spectacle. Word had spread beyond the neighborhood, beyond even the city. By the time the preliminary hearings began, local news outlets were calling it the HOA horror case, and podcast hosts were doing deep dives into Karen's past with the kind of detail usually reserved for crime documentaries. The footage of her entering our home had gone viral not just online, but on television. One national show dubbed it the most unhinged HOA moment in American history, which probably said more about how often HOAs made the news than anything else. Either way, Karen had become a household name, and not in the way she had hoped. Inside the courtroom, however, things took on a different tone. Serious, heavy, filled with a kind of tension that doesn't come from drama but from the weight of real consequences. She sat at the defendant's table with a new lawyer, an older woman who looked like she'd been dragged into the case reluctantly and was already regretting it. Karen wore black. Not out of mourning, I guessed, but as a calculated move, like someone who'd Googled what to wear to look innocent in court. Her hair was tied back, her makeup toned down, and the brooch was gone. She didn't look like the self-proclaimed neighborhood enforcer anymore. She looked like someone clinging to the last thread of a fantasy she had spent years building. Maria and I sat together in the front row, right behind our attorney. Ms. Pearl was there too, along with half a dozen neighbors who had taken off work just to be present. Some brought notes. Some brought documents. One even brought a copy of a fake fine Karen had issued 6 months ago, citing improper porch symmetry. The judge had to remind the gallery twice to stay quiet when testimony began, mostly because people kept snorting in disbelief when Karen tried to explain herself. I truly believed I was acting in the best interest of the community, she said on the stand, voice quivering just enough to seem rehearsed. There had been concerns about the visual impact of certain medical installations and whether they posed safety risks to children walking by. I only intended to investigate. The prosecutor raised an eyebrow. By cutting a resident's oxygen line and removing prescription medication from their home? Karen blinked. I thought the equipment was improperly installed. I wanted to disable it temporarily to ensure it wasn't hazardous. And the medication? I didn't realize what it was. So you entered a private residence without consent, tampered with life-supporting equipment, stole a federal substance, and you're claiming it was community service? There was a pause so long you could hear the bailiff exhale. Karen tried to pivot. The Taylors had always been hostile toward the HOA. I was trying to maintain peace. They were creating disorder. At that point, the judge interjected. You believe that a man recovering from respiratory failure, using a legally prescribed medical device, was responsible for disorder? Karen opened her mouth, then closed it. Maria didn't flinch through the entire testimony. She just stared at Karen like she was watching someone try to rewrite reality in real time. When it was her turn to take the stand, she didn't need notes. She spoke plainly, clearly, and with a quiet kind of fury that silenced the entire courtroom. I've seen people die gasping for breath, she said. People who would have lived if they just had a few more seconds of oxygen. When I came home that night and saw my husband clawing at the floor, pale and shaking, I thought I'd lost him. And when I saw the tubing, cleanly cut, I knew it wasn't an accident. Someone did that on purpose. and that someone walked into our home without permission, put his life in danger, and thought it was acceptable because she didn't like how it looked. The jury looked shaken. Even the defense attorney looked tired. By the end of the trial, the verdict wasn't a surprise. Guilty on all counts. Unlawful entry, reckless endangerment, mail theft, and obstruction. The judge sentenced Karen to 18 months probation, 6 months of monitored house arrest, a $5,000 fine, and community service, specifically working with patients who relied on medical support systems. A poetic touch that I suspected Judge Holbrook added with a slight smirk behind the gavel. But that wasn't the real victory. The real win came 2 weeks later when the final vote came in. The HOA was officially dissolved. The petition had worked, the board was gone, and in its place, a new residents' council was formed. No dues. No secret meetings. Just volunteers elected by popular vote to help coordinate things like block parties and safety alert. Ms. Pearl was voted chair on the spot. The first thing she did was send out a printed flyer that read, "In this neighborhood, your oxygen is your business. Welcome back to sanity." Karen's house went up for sale shortly after. She never returned to a single community event. A few people said they saw her in her yard once or twice, but mostly she stayed inside. Her home looked like a fortress now, the shutters drawn, the lawn neglected. No notes appeared on doors anymore. No mysterious finds. No surprise inspections. It was like the Karen era had ended and left behind nothing but overgrown hedges and bitter silence. One morning, Maria and I went for a walk and passed her house. There was a handwritten sign in the yard that read, "Private property, no trespassing, protected by legal force." Maria looked at it for a long moment, then turned to me. "Funny," she said. "That's exactly what we said when she walked into our home." We kept walking. That weekend, our neighborhood held its first No HOA Freedom Fest. There was barbecue, music, bounce houses for the kids, and a dunk tank featuring a cardboard cutout of Karen. No one said her name out loud, but the jokes flew anyway. I sat on the porch with my oxygen machine humming beside me. Not hidden, not draped in shame, just existing the way it was supposed to. Safe. Undisturbed. Mine. A few reporters showed up too, wanting follow-ups. I declined interviews. So did Maria. It wasn't about the spotlight. It was about breathing easy in our own home again, about having neighbors we trusted, about waking up without wondering if someone was lurking outside with a clipboard and a grudge. Later that night, as the sun set over the block and the party faded into fireflies and chatter, I sat beside Maria and looked across the street one last time. Karen's house was dark, empty. For sale sign tilted just slightly in the wind. Somewhere in that silence, justice had taken root. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't just feel like I'd won. I felt free.